Marbury versus Madison. How was our government different before the court case? I think when reviewing the information, the biggest thing that I found was this was about power. You had a situation where, had it not been corrected, had this uh, court case not come to the Supreme Court attention, it really allowed an opportunity for favoritism and actually sending the message that you can have a disregard for the system. Also, too, I think it showed that there was already corruption in the political system. The fact that Madison told Marbury, hey, you want to be a judge? Like, let's hurry up and get this thing turned around pretty quick before Jefferson comes into office, because then we know he's going to uh, overturn it or not allow us to do it. That just shows the shadiness of the system. I think when we have systems in place and you have those formalities and those structures, to be honest, they're not going to eliminate that this type of corruption doesn't happen. But to be fair, they are going to minimize it. We need these types of structures and these systems and these laws and things in order to be able to have society as a whole function a lot better. The significant aspects of this case. For me, I thought it was interesting how we had the Judicial Act of 1789, and then it went to 1801, and then all of a sudden we're going to revise it again in 1802, and how we didn't want to make any changes. It just, again, it just goes back to showing that there was an opportunity for corruption and for favoritism and for all of these things to take place. They weren't right. They were not right. I think the fact how the Supreme Court decided to give themselves the power to declare a law unconstitutional, I think that was a good thing. I don't think it overrode the separation of powers. I think it was actually good, because when you look at what the Supreme Court's function is, that's what they're doing. They're completely tied to the Constitution. They're not looking at it, is this person guilty versus not guilty? That's something that the state courts decide on. Once something has been appealed and it's gone up to that next higher court, they're not looking at it a guilty versus guilty. They're looking at it from the Constitution standpoint. Was this person's rights violated? And I think that's the reason why it doesn't overlap. In this particular case, again, how Madison had promised Marbury that he would have that appointment, and obviously Marbury was upset that he didn't get it. But in the midst of all of that chaos, I think we had a more positive system that came into play. How does this impact our lives today? I think one of the other things that came into play was the Miranda rights, and how law enforcement now has to tell people their rights. I think this just kind of goes back to our education level on what the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are, and society in general, their understanding or lack of understanding. It's pretty sad to think that every time an officer has to arrest somebody, they have to read them their right. I think that should be part of the system just in general. When you come into this country, these are things that you need to know. These are things that you need to learn. These are things that need to be taught in the classroom. I mean, these things need to be taught to our children when they're young and it's early on and they're just learning about what this country means. I think we teach them so much about so many different things that these are basic fundamental rights. And I think that really needs to be the core. I think if people understand who, what, where, when, why, and how, it's going to help them in the long run, because it's a parameter. The Bible talks about where there is no vision, the people cast off restraint, And it just reminds me of Adam and Eve in the garden, God is a God of order. He's always wanted that. He set up a boundary, and a lot of times people don't like boundaries, and it's just because our nature is to be sinful. We want what we want. It's the same thing when it's the same sin that Satan fell for. He wanted to be like God. He wanted to do his own thing. And I think that there's situations where you do need to be different and you do need to stand out. But I think in this aspect, these laws and rights were put into place to protect us from ourselves. Obviously, the framers knew over time that society was going to change. It was going to become more progressive. You know, they had that idea. I think they had that type of insight way ahead of time, insight beyond their years. And so when they wrote the Constitution, it was for society to be able to change along with the Constitution. I don't think there was ever an intent to like, hey, let's keep revising this document as society changes. I think it was like the Bible, it's the word, it's a foundation, and it's supposed to be there. I think the biggest thing is we're so far in progressivism that in wanting our rights and wanting change and choices and to be liberal in all things, that we're actually being robbed of our peace. We're being robbed of the ability to be free, to hope, to have choices, to live righteous lives. I think the biggest thing you see this is with the election of Donald Trump. You had a whole generation of people that were just devastated. They felt like they were completely losing their lives. The enemy already came in and stole their peace. He already stole their hope. He stole their freedom, but it was because these people were connecting it just to another person rather than to God. So I think that's the biggest thing. Like, how much change is change, and who's really in charge? What are we in charge of? I think as we just get back to our roots and back to the foundation and understanding how this stuff was written and why it was written, I think that's going to be the biggest thing that we're going to see change.